Welcome to another episode of the Creating Belonging podcast. Today I have with me Nancy Lyons. Nancy, if you wouldn't mind just introducing.
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks for having me first. I am Nancy Lyons. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm a co-founder and CEO of an experience design and technology consultancy called Clockwork. I also am a co-founder of a low-code, no-code agile studio called Tempo, and I've written a couple of books. I'm a keynote speaker, and I'm also for the purpose of this particular podcast, I will share that I'm also a chair emeritus for an organization called Family Equality, which is the leading national organization working for lived and legal equality for LGBTQ plus families and those that want to form them.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. And most of our listeners are used to us starting the conversation with just disclosure of identities. So I want to take a moment to see if there are any identities that you'd like to share to anchor us in our conversation.
Sure, thanks for asking. Well, my pronouns are she, her, they, them, and I am queer, a woman, I am white, I am a mother, I am a spouse. I'm also a badass.
I love some of the random identities that come up, like badass. I love that as an identity. I got to add that to the list. Nancy and I were just chatting before we were getting started. I'm excited to dive into this conversation. We were talking about the creating belonging model. Nancy was sharing an experience she had a number of years back when she was doing some consulting. I would love to dig into that story if you wouldn't mind sharing. Let's start there and see where we go.
Well, it was an organization that I actually worked inside of. I had worked my way up the ranks. This was my early managerial career, and I was learning how to lead people. A lot of it was pretty organic. We were young. It was a technology company, and it was in the 90s. We wanted to be values driven, bring our authentic selves, and we wanted people to have a different experience with this organization than they had had in other workplaces. In other words, we wanted them to feel free to bring their whole selves, their authentic selves. This was before the language of belonging was really in play. We were working hard to create our own language, but also to make a space open. I don't think the language of diversity existed at that point in time. There wasn't a real effort to create belonging, but the reality was that's what we were trying to create. In doing that, we coalesced around a shared set of very progressive values. We didn't have a dress code. It was a technology company. We made software and websites in the early days of internet software and websites. So we didn't have a dress code. We didn't really have a start or end time. It was really results oriented. We were remote before remote was even a conversation in the technology space. We let people sort of build their own schedules, benefit from flexibility, bring their sort of experiences. And, for me as a queer woman, it was really important to be able to be out and safe. We wanted that for everyone else too. And we believed that that's what we were creating. I had this experience with a colleague who was a gifted engineer. This was one of those moments that I will never forget. I'm very outgoing. I'm very talkative. He is an engineer who likes to be in quiet spaces. And we were paired together to drive to Iowa to deliver a pitch to an agricultural organization. In that 6-hour drive in the car, we were being inundated with the smell of turkey farming. I remember saying out loud, "What is that? It's horrible." Interestingly enough, we also enjoyed a couple of fun little side trips. On the way back, after we had this moment that I'm about to share with you, we were suddenly so comfortable with each other that we stopped at one of those living museums, the homestead, farmstead living museum. And
Yeah.
we weren't friends. We weren't close. We barely knew each other. We worked together and he was very quiet. But this moment that I'm about to share actually brought us closer to the point where we were taking pictures of each other, standing in an old farmhouse next to somebody dressed up like Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Um,
But the moment itself was tense. I realized my own failing or tunnel vision because my colleague was telling me how much he appreciated the place where we both worked, but that he was feeling confused and marginalized. And what he revealed was while we were trying to create this safe space for everyone, he was feeling like it wasn't okay for him to be a Christian, a person of faith, and that it wasn't okay for him to acknowledge that, to share any of his faith-based interests. A lot of people find community in their churches. He didn't feel safe talking about his church. A lot of people enjoy their family in the context of church or their faith. There's so much that Christianity does to influence how a Christian lives. And what he was trying to explain to me was there was just no room for that. And I have to admit, it was a stunning revelation for me because I thought I was working hard to make space for everybody when I was making space for a lot of people that were perhaps usually marginalized or kept out of those conversations that lead to belonging. But in doing so, I was marginalizing my white Christian colleague. It made me feel lousy because I really felt committed to that purpose. He should have felt safe being a person of faith in the environment we were creating together. He should have felt okay. And I actually had a lot of admiration for him for saying it and not just sort of tamping it down and, letting his masculinity drive the conversation and not express himself as not being afraid of anything. I think that was the option. That's certainly where a lot of people would have gone. I'm tough, I'm a leader, I can manage this. It's not important. But clearly his faith was so important to him that he found a moment where it was essential for him to share that. I think in that moment, you and I were talking about the concept of being overbearing. And I realized as you were talking that that's exactly what I was, that I believed that we all saw the world the same way and we're operating under the same set of assumptions. Because of that, I made no room for this man and whomever else identified in a similar way with him on our staff.
Nancy, thank you for sharing that. It's interesting because it drives home the point that there's some research I reference in the book around traditional approaches to DEIB. And you're talking about a time before those letters existed. I definitely remember when I started the work, it was just diversity, and that was in the 2000s. The DEIB wasn't in that lexicon back then. As we look at the research and the typical approaches and some of the challenges, that kind of multicultural approach, which is much more common today, where difference is celebrated, non-marginalized individuals are celebrated, which is great. It is off-putting or makes others feel marginalized who aren't typically marginalized. It's interesting because for me, the biggest thing is whenever I reference that work, it's not that I have a problem with making white men uncomfortable, including myself, but they're often the people that we need to get on board to help make room for everyone, right? And ensure that our inclusion and belonging efforts are actually working. So it's interesting. I'm curious to dig into that a little bit more. What else did he share in that conversation that made him feel othered or marginalized?
Well, I do think that, because the time was the late 90s. I'm aging myself here, but we were all very young, typical Gen Xers. We looked like we were out of a movie, like a Winona Ryder, Ethan Hawke movie, right? Like Reality Bites. We were all wearing our flannel and our jeans. We were nonconformists. We were going to make change. In some ways, we were rejecting the establishment.
Yeah.
And that what he represented for himself in the context of all that was exactly what we were rejecting. But it was interesting because he was a pretty shy guy. He didn't spend a lot of time emoting. He was very direct. I'm not naming this person for a variety of reasons, but over time, I've realized he probably lived in the context of a number of identities, one of which may have been neurodivergent. Express this. The way he expressed it was so matter of fact and direct, lacking additional details. What he said was pretty point blank. I don't feel safe being Christian. And I don't think you all think about those people in your midst that have values that are different from yours. And to me, here's the thing. I think values are something that we can share regardless of our identities, right?
Mhm.
Like for me, you can be a Christian And I am a person of faith, probably more on the agnostic side, just because I think there's no way this all just, I believe in science, but I
Mhm.
also believe science may have come from, we don't need to get into me. My point is, I believe that people who don't believe in Christianity can also live by a moral code that resembles the good side of Christian morality, right? Not the judgmental, difficult side that sometimes I witness in the world, the condemnation, the hellfire and damnation. But the teachings of Jesus are really the ideal moral code. Whether you believe in Jesus as the Son of God or Jesus as a prophet or a man walking the earth, this idea that we should love each other as we love ourselves, that we should do right by our neighbor, that we shouldn't harm others or be selfish, that we should share and care for one another. My God, there's no reason for us not to be able to subscribe to a moral code that looks like that.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me that he was actually speaking of values and suggesting that we didn't share them, when in fact, part of the reason why I was so deluded at the time is because I thought we all just want to care for each other. We all just want to collaborate and share. We all just want to make space for one another. We all want to feel safe at work. And there was something about his Christianity that he didn't articulate in that moment that made him feel like it wasn't safe. Now, I will say we had very vocal, and this was also before HR was terribly advanced and caught up to the current cultural conversation. We had very vocal people who condemned Christianity at the time, not in a hateful way, but in a dismissive way. I'm sure that someone actually said something around him that made him feel small. That may have been what he was reacting to. Like I said, I think it was a super brave thing for him to bring up, and it was something that I was able to address in a more covert way when I got home. It wasn't like, we're going to love Christians now. Let's make space for the Christians. But I was able to speak to the leadership team and the rest of the staff in a different setting about our need to really expand our definition of inclusion. That it can't just be people that agree with us. And
Mhm.
actually, I think that's what the world is suffering from right now. We want to be
Uh,
inclusive only if we all feel the same way about how things work. And
yeah. Okay, so there's so many directions I want to go. I'm going to start with values because I think it's meaningful. Several years ago, in my work of diversity, I worked for a very large global organization. Diversity there is like we're literally in many countries. We are by nature a very diverse organization and very culturally diverse. A session on diversity when the message was about holding people in a place of acceptance and appreciation, and that tolerance is not enough. If you've ever felt tolerated, that's just not actually a great feeling. The woman came up to me after the session and very unironically said, Justin, my faith tells me that I can't accept gay people. So you're telling me that the organization is telling me that I need to accept gay people, but my faith tells me that I can't. In front of me, I have to conjure up all kinds of strength in that moment of like, okay, well, let's have the right conversation here and calmly. And I did say, look, it sounds like your values may not align with the values of your employer. You may need to evaluate that and choose whether you want to work for an employer that has values that don't align with yours. The interesting part of that, and this is going to dovetail into what you were saying of that kind of general moral code, is I'm like, I I don't think if of the Christian faith, anybody said don't accept gay people. You can interpret, I'm not going to debate, like, interpret 5,000 ways of the scripture of whether it's right or wrong. However, there are some specific things that I understand about the Christian faith that are like, love others as yourself, accept everyone, judge no one, that don't line up, right? So I just think it's interesting. I'm going to pause there and get some reactions.
yeah, actually, if I may, I'd like to share another really interesting story, and it touches on what you just said. And it also speaks to my own evolution as a leader. So cut to later in the 2000s when I was a co-founder of the company that I am the CEO of now. We've been around a long time. I think that's the story you're hearing. I had really worked hard to make space for people that had different opinions and different belief systems. Over the years, I'd had some really interesting conversations with other folks of faith who were deeply enmeshed in dogma, religion, and communities of religion. I had a young man who had started with us. If he didn't start as an intern, he started as a very junior level front end engineer slash designer. He and I had become, it's so different from now because it was so early in our story that I had relationships with everybody. Now I don't work on the delivery side of the business, so it's different to think about this. And this story is probably going to stun folks that I work with too. And he and I had an opportunity to get to know each other. We had done some of our one-on-ones, and I'm a very approachable person. Once you get to know me, people tell me all the time, "Oh, you scare me." It's like, cool. I can't do anything about it. I'm big. That's my personality. This young man had gotten to a place where he felt comfortable enough to approach me. And I always encourage, I have this open door. You can direct message me anytime. We can have any conversation you want. If you need counsel or mentoring or have criticism or feedback, I'm open. And this fellow, we were all working on a tight deadline. It was nighttime. We were all in our homes, and this was before Slack. We were using some direct messaging application. He messaged me. I opened the message and he said, "I don't want to fight, but how do you feel about the fact that you're going to hell?" This is the CEO, and he is the newest hire at the junior level. In any other organization, that would be problematic. I was proud that it wasn't in my own. I can honestly say, regardless of my personal feelings or relationships inside the organization, there have only been one or two times where I have given myself grief for treating somebody unfairly. For the most part, I really work not to treat anybody unfairly or to operate out of taking something personally. I can't say that I don't operate from emotion. So he asked me how I felt about going to hell. And I thought about it a minute. And I remembered I had this mentor who was also a person of faith. And he and I had had a conversation, and he shared this bit of wisdom with me that I then shared with this young man. And I said, "I don't profess to being capable of speaking for God. I sometimes worry about people who are. I certainly don't take aspects of the Bible literally because it has been through so many translations and rewritings. And let's not even start with the origins and why it was written in the first place. But what I do know is that when Christ was asked what God really wants from us, he said simply to love God and love each other. And I know that I do, that I am showing up for the thing that Christ said God cares about the most. When I think about God, I may not think about the same being that you do, but God also said we are made in his image. So taking a page from your scripture, if I love people, if I truly care for people, I am doing what your God is asking of me. I don't feel like that God is going to condemn me because I do genuinely care about people, and I do work to help those that are less fortunate than me, or to work to create spaces where marginalized people can exist freely and openly. Um, I do work to be a decent employer and a decent human, and I'm not a greedy, white lady. And he really accepted that. I mean, I think it really threw him off, right? He was hoping to challenge me, and I think he didn't know how to respond to it. And we actually became very close and are still in touch to this day. He no longer works with us. He's now a leader in his own right in a company. I actually saw a picture of him recently. He's bald. That's how old I am. I have a young man who has grown up and is now bald on my network. Um, but it was I was glad to have that response for him. And it's helped inform how I respond to other people that ask equally as difficult questions relative to their Christianity.
Yeah. It's such a great response. And and it also just makes me think of like, okay, so the individual who initiated that conversation, like, what's the objective?
Hmm.
is the objective to have an argument, or is the objective to convert you to something? Like, what's the um? But I love your response, and I love how that landed.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, he's actually a really lovely guy. He was so young and, so young and so influenced by his parents and his church and so, he I don't think he'd gotten to a point where critical thinking was part of his, resume, if you will. And I think he's matured, and I doubt that he would ever ask a CEO of a company that question again. But we have great respect for each other, and he is still a fine Christian man that, I think he's a lovely guy. But I do think, to your question, was he trying to have a fight? I actually think he was worried about me. I think that was it. I think it was such a, he wanted to challenge me, but I think he was worried about me. He was worried about my soul. And, I hope that what I said to him made him realize that my soul is not for him to worry about.
Yeah, yeah.
This is not
That's
where I thought our conversation was gonna go, by the way. This is fast. I've talked more about Christianity today than I have in the last 10 years. We're
I
welcome.
know. So I love it though. I love it because about 2 months ago. Um, I'm working on the second edition of the book, and I'm thinking about like what are the chapters I'm adding, what's the research I want to add, and it is not in the outline yet, and I'm not sure I'm committed to or would put it in, but I've thought about a religion chapter, creating
Mhm,
belonging and religion, because so much exclusion happens in the name of religion. And I'm not saying that all religions are exclusive, but I am
mhm,
saying exclusion happens in the name of religion. And you know, if you look at the religion that I'm most familiar with being in Christianity, I'm like, just like you say, like actually, if we're really examining it, that's not like we need to be inclusive. That's what
mhm,
right? That's where what we're told.
mhm.
And so really examining that, but I'm um just putting it out there that I've entertained it, but it's seems like a really deep rabbit hole.
Yeah, that would be quite the quagmire, and yet I love the idea of it. I do, because I think religion is being weaponized, and at its core, there's nothing wrong with faith.
Mhm.
Faith is was what has gotten us through generations of trauma.
Mhm.
Um, you know, for many people, not all. And so I think if we could find a way to find each other in spite of and through and with our faith,
Mhm.
um, I think that would be phenomenal. I mean, think about it right now. Our government is weaponizing religion, and religion is weaponizing our government against, a huge faction of the population. And
Mhm.
it's really troubling and unfortunate. It's unfortunate. You know,
Mhm.
I was raised in an Irish Catholic family. My my mother converted from baptism. That was my grandma didn't care that I was gay, but she was really upset that my mom went from Baptist to
Oh, wow.
Catholicism. Um and at our core we all, I would go to the Baptist church when I visited my grandmother. We all, I at our core, the message, the values, the ways of being, the expectations are so similar. I mean, there's much more ritual and money, quite frankly, in the Catholic Church, get me started. But,
Yeah.
at its core, my grandmother was a deeply loving, God-fearing, but generous, caring human being.
Mhm.
And, and, my parents were decent human beings too, or are decent. Well, one of them are and were. Um, and I think a lot of it came from how they felt about their faith. But I couldn't subscribe because the the institution didn't want me. And then I became a more critical thinker as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've talked a bit about my evolution as well, over over the years in the work. So I'll save that. Um, those times. But I think so. To close us out, I just want to grab this like um interesting parallel of because I'm always tying it back to the model.
Mhm,
Let's back
mhm,
to the belonging model, and it's so interesting of like actually in your response to that employee was we are made in his image. And so we are a celebration of God, right? And so if we think about authenticity
mhm,
in showing up as ourselves and loving ourselves as being made in his own image
mhm,
and loving others,
mhm.
being acceptance. That's it. That's the creating belonging model.
It's everything.
I mean, maybe it all goes back to my roots of like my oh, what do you call it? Oh my gosh, no, I can't think of it. Like confirmation.
Oh, confirmation, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Seeds were planted. I
yeah,
was
well,
just
the essence of all of it, the essence of faith, the essence of spirituality is good and whole and decent. It's people who have corrupted and weaponized
mhm,
those things. But I think what
mhm,
you just said is the reason I am on this earth.
yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Me too. I
Alright.
love it.
We're gonna hug when
Nancy,
we meet
okay.
in person.
I know we definitely will meet in person.
Yes.
And I love where this conversation went today. Totally not what I expected on this Tuesday afternoon. But this is amazing. Um, Nancy, real quick before we close out, how can people find you and get in touch with you?
Oh, well, easy. I have a website. My personal website for my speaking and my books is nancylyons.com. Super easy, Lyons. You can find my company Clockwork at clockwork.com. You can find Tempo at madebytempo.com. And you can find me on all the socials at Nylons. That's because I've been on there a really long time and my name is Nancy Lyons and N Lyons. Everybody saw nylon, so I used it. But now the young people don't even know what nylons are. So that's a whole other podcast.
There's this great Gen X meme that I've seen recently that is like something like regret is your first screen names on the internet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, that's a good one. I gotta find it.
Great. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it. Everyone else, stay tuned for another podcast.
Thanks for having me.